When a 9-year-old girl walked into a biker bar holding a loaded gun, time stopped. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just looked around at a room full of rough, tattooed men and said 6 words that froze every heartbeat in that place. "Which one of you is my father?" No one moved. No one spoke. And in that moment, a room full of hardened men had to face something they spent their whole lives running from: the truth. Sometimes the loudest moments in life are the quiet ones that come right before everything changes. It was a Saturday evening in late August, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes even the cold beer sweat. The Iron Rooster sat just off Highway 14, halfway between nowhere and a place you'd rather forget. The men who gathered there weren't choir boys, they were bikers. Leather vests, road scars, stories no one ever asked them to tell. They laughed loud, drank hard, and lived like every day was borrowed time. But on that night, something happened that none of them could have seen coming. The old wooden door groaned as it swung inward, and for a second the whole bar froze. At first, they thought maybe it was the sheriff, or worse, someone from a rival crew. But what walked through that door made the room go dead silent. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Small, with dirt on her cheeks, hair tangled from the wind, and a denim jacket that looked like it once belonged to someone twice her size. But it wasn't the jacket that made everyone stare. It was what she was holding: a revolver, heavy, cold, too big for her small hands, but steady. Pointed at a room full of men who'd seen everything except this. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the neon sign outside. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. Then, she spoke. "Which one of you is my father?" Her voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't angry either. It was the kind of voice that carries when it has been holding something in for far too long. Now, imagine being one of those men. You've done things you don't talk about. You've buried pieces of yourself under asphalt, whiskey, and regret. And then a little girl walks in and says that. No one moved. No one dared. From the far end of the bar, a man named Ray Dalton, though everyone called him Bones, looked up from his drink. He was in his mid-50s, broad shoulders, silver beard, eyes that had seen war, bars, and bad years. A man who'd ridden through too many storms to count. And for a moment, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't blink. Didn't speak, just stared at the little girl like time had reached out and grabbed him by the throat. "Ray," the bartender said quietly, "you know her?" Ray didn't answer. His jaw clenched, and a long silence filled the room, the kind that weighs heavy enough to crush a man's chest. The girl took a step forward, her small boots echoing on the wooden floor. "You left my mama," she said. "She told me to find you before she died." Someone muttered, "Christ almighty." Another whispered, "What's she talking about, Bones?" But Bones just kept staring. That haunted look in his eyes said it all. He knew exactly who she was. Her name was Lily, and whether he liked it or not, that little girl had just pulled the pin on a memory he had spent half his life trying to bury. From the corner booth, an old-timer named Denny leaned over and whispered, "Well, fellas, this ain't on the happy hour menu." A few uneasy chuckles broke out. Not because it was funny, but because fear always needs somewhere to go, and laughter's cheaper than panic. The girl's arms began to tremble slightly. That gun looked heavy now, heavier than any child should ever have to hold, but her eyes stayed locked on Ray. "You're him," she said, "aren't you?" Ray's mouth opened, but no words came out. Only air, only silence. He stood slowly, every joint cracking like dry branches, and in a low, gravelly voice he said, Yeah, sweetheart. I think I am." No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the air itself refused to breathe. And then, the girl's hands began to shake. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't want to shed. The gun slipped. It hit the floor with a clatter so loud it made everyone jump. Ray flinched. Gus, the bartender, exhaled. And just like that, the room, the whole damn world, started breathing again. Ray took one careful step toward her, then another. He knelt down, slow enough not to scare her. His voice was soft, softer than anyone in that bar had ever heard it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been there. For you. For your mama." The girl blinked through her tears. Her lip trembled. Then she whispered, "She said you'd say that." And with that, the weight of everything broke. The gun, the anger, the walls around Ray's heart. He reached out, gently took her hand, and held it against his rough, weathered palm. That touch, that single human touch, was the first real thing either of them had felt in years. No one in that bar forgot what they saw that night. A hardened man brought to his knees by the smallest voice in the room. A little girl, brave enough to walk through the fire of her own pain just to find the truth. They didn't know what would happen next, but every man there knew something had shifted. The Iron Rooster would never be the same again. The revolver lay on the floor, cold and harmless now. But no one in the Iron Rooster felt safe, not from the truth that had just stepped into their lives. Gus, the bartender, reached down and slid the gun away with a bar towel, careful not to make a sound. He placed it behind the counter, next to the register, like it might still bite. The men sat quietly, nursing their beers. Every now and then someone coughed, or a stool creaked. But most of them just stared at the little girl, and at the man who couldn't look away from her. Ray Bones Dalton sat on the edge of a bar stool, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. He didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed, slow and heavy like a man who'd just been punched in the soul. It had been 20 years since he'd last seen Sarah, 20 years since that final fight, the one where he said words he could never take back. Back then, he thought walking away was mercy. He told himself she'd be better off without him. He told himself that being a father wasn't tea in his blood, that the road was safer than love, but the truth was simpler and uglier. He'd been scared of being needed, scared of what kind of man he might be if someone ever saw who he really was underneath the patches and pride. The girl, Lily, sat across from him now. Her legs didn't even reach the bar rail. She was staring at the floor, not crying anymore, just thinking. Gus finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Kid," he said, "you hungry?" She nodded without looking up. "All right," Gus said. "Burger or grilled cheese?" "Burger," she whispered, "coming right up." As the smell of frying meat filled the air, one of the bikers, a big man named Rocco, leaned over and said under his breath, "Bones, what the hell's going on, man?" Ray rubbed the back of his neck. "It's a long story." "Then make it short," Rocco muttered. "We all just watched a kid point a gun at us." From the corner, old Denny added, "Yeah, and I spilled my beer ducking for cover, so someone owes me $5. A few chuckles broke out, thin, nervous laughter. It wasn't joy, it was relief. When life gets too real, a bad joke can save a man's sanity. Ray looked at Lily again, her small hands wrapped around a glass of water, untouched, and something inside him cracked open, the part of him that had been sealed off for 2 decades. He turned to the room. "You boys want to know the story? Fine, but it ain't one I'm proud of. Her mama's name was Sarah," he said. "Met her back in '04. She was working him at a diner off Route 12. Smile brighter than the jukebox, laugh that made you forget your name." He paused, half smiling through the pain. "I was riding with the Iron Wolves back then, thought I was untouchable, thought love was something for people who didn't know better. But she saw right through me, every scar, every lie. And for a while, she made me believe I could be better." The men listened, silent as the grave. Even Gus stopped wiping the counter. Ray's voice trembled a bit when he said the next part. She told me she was pregnant. I should have been happy, but all I saw was every mistake I'd ever made knocking at my door again. So I ran. Told her I couldn't give her a life worth having. Told her I'd just mess it up. She cried that night, didn't yell, didn't beg, just looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. And then I left, rode out before sunrise, never went back. Lily looked up at him then, eyes full of hurt and disbelief. You left her alone? She said softly. Ray nodded. Yeah, sweetheart, I did. She got sick, Lily whispered. Said she had cancer. Said she wanted to see you before she went. But she couldn't find you. Her voice cracked. She said you'd have to find me instead. Ray swallowed hard. I never knew, he said. I didn't know she was sick. Lily's eyes narrowed like she didn't believe him. But deep down, maybe she wanted to. She left a letter, the girl said. Said you weren't all bad. Said you had good in you once, before the road took it. She told me to find you. Said maybe, if you saw me, you'd remember what that good part felt like. Gus slid a burger over. Eat, kid, he said softly. Lily took a bite. Slow, deliberate, like her body remembered hunger even if her heart didn't. The men sat quietly as she ate. And in that strange stillness, something gentle crept into the room. An old feeling they hadn't felt in years. Compassion. Funny thing about tough men, they can face knives, fights, and police sirens without blinking, but give them a child's tears and they'll fall apart like paper in the rain. Ray looked at her and said, I can't change what I did, but I can be here now, if you'll let me. Lily whispered. She said you'd say that too. Ray half laughed, shaking his head. Smart woman. From the back, Denny mumbled, Man, if this doesn't end with someone buying her ice cream, I'm gonna lose it. A few more chuckles. The tension breaks just enough. Ray leaned back, rubbing his hands together. I don't know what comes next, he said, but I ain't running anymore. And for the first time that night, he smiled. It wasn't big or bright, but it was real. The bar grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, peaceful, maybe even sacred. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes, when the air still hums with leftover thunder. Gus refilled Ray's coffee. So what now, Bones? He asked. Ray looked at Lily, who was now leaning against the bar, eyelids heavy. I think it's time I finally do right by somebody, he said. Gus nodded. About damn time. By the time the clock hit midnight, the Iron Rooster was empty except for Ray, Gus, and the little girl asleep on a pile of leather jackets. Outside, the desert wind howled against the glass. Inside, Ray sat there in silence, watching her breathe, wondering how a life he had once thrown away had come back and sat itself right next to him. He didn't know it yet, but the next morning would change everything. Because sometimes, when you stop running from the past stops chasing you, and it starts to lead you home. Morning light crawled across the floorboards of the Iron Rooster. Dust hung in the air like quiet memories. The bar, usually full of noise and laughter, now felt like a church that had forgotten how to pray. Ray Bones Dalton sat at the counter, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside him. Beside that mug, a folded napkin, a few dollar bills, and a decision. On the far end, curled up under a worn leather jacket, Lily slept, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other clutching the corner of her mother's old denim sleeve. Ray watched her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest pulled another thread from the knot in his chest. For the first time in years, the road didn't call to him. The hum of his bike didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like running. Gus came out from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. Morning, he said quietly. Ray nodded. Morning. She sleep okay? Gus asked. Yeah, Ray said. Out cold, guess she needed it. Gus poured him more coffee. So what's next? Ray stared into his mug, watching the steam twist and fade. I don't know, he said, but I know I can't just let her walk back out there alone. Gus leaned against the counter. You know, Bones, you ain't got to be perfect to make something right. Sometimes just showing up's a start. Ray smirked. You trying to be wise again? Somebody's got to be, Gus said. Half these guys couldn't find wisdom if it came with beer and GPS. Ray chuckled, shaking his head. You always had a way with words. He looked back at Lily. Something about her, the way she slept without fear like the world hadn't beaten her down yet, reminded him of Sarah. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, worn and dull. It was Sarah's. He'd kept it all those years without knowing why. Now he did. He set it beside Lily's hand and whispered, You'll know who you are, sweetheart, even if it took me too long to figure it out. The door creaked open again, and the men of the Iron Rooster drifted in one by one. Same faces, different air. They saw the girl, the coffee, the jacket, and they understood. Bones, Rocco said, rubbing the back of his neck. You taking off? Yeah, Ray said, buttoning his jacket. Not the way you're thinking, though. He stood there, keys in his hand, the morning sun spilling through the dusty window. The bike waited outside, chrome catching light like a promise. I ain't riding solo anymore, Ray said quietly. I'm taking her home, wherever that ends up being. Rocco grinned. Guess the road's got a new passenger. Guess so, Ray said, half smiling. Maybe she'll learn how to drive before I hit 80. They gathered around the girl as she woke. Gus handed her a paper cup of orange juice. Denny offered a small teddy bear he'd dug out of his truck. It was missing one eye, but she hugged it like treasure. Ray crouched beside her. Morning, kiddo, he said. You ready to go? Lily blinked, still half asleep. Where? Somewhere new, he said. Somewhere we can start over. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if she could trust this man who used to be a ghost. Then she nodded. Okay, but I get to pick the music. Ray laughed. Fair deal. The sound of the engine broke the morning stillness, low, steady, alive. Lily climbed on behind him, helmet a little too big, jacket sleeves swallowing her arms. Ray checked the mirror once, then again. Not to look back, but to make sure she was still there. And then, without a word, they rolled out. Onto the highway, into the wind. Two souls that life had torn apart, somehow finding their way back. For weeks, no one at the Iron Rooster heard from them. Just empty bar stools and the hum of memory. But the story traveled, as stories like this always do. Men who'd never met Ray started riding different, calling their kids more, sitting quiet before they spoke. Because sometimes, watching someone else face their ghosts reminds you to face your own. One day, Gus found a postcard in the morning mail. It was weathered, edges curled from the sun. On the front, a photograph of a man and a little girl standing beside an old motorcycle. Behind them, the Montana sky stretched wide and blue. On the back, 6 simple words. Found what I was looking for. Gus smiled, slipped the postcard into the mirror frame behind the bar, and wiped a tear from his cheek. He didn't tell the others right away. Some stories don't need explaining. They just need remembering. Every year after that, on the same August night, the Iron Rooster stayed open a little later. No fights, no noise, just a single shot of whiskey for the man who finally stopped running, and the little girl who taught him how. Life has a funny way of bringing people back to what matters, even if it takes the long road. Sometimes it's too late for apologies. Sometimes it's not. But it's never too late to try. And if you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of your own mistakes, wondering if you can still make something right, remember Ray and Lily, because somewhere out there on a long, quiet highway, a father and daughter are still chasing sunsets. And maybe, just maybe, they finally caught one. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who still believes in second chances. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories about redemption, love, and the kind of courage it takes to forgive, subscribe, stay a while, and ride with us again.